So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our presentation on the Nooksack Basin Co-Manager's 10-year hatchery plan. My name is Tom Chance, and I'm the Salmon Enhancement Program Manager with Lummi Nation. The presentation will provide information on what the 10-year plan is, and it will be wrapped up with a policy discussion. A significant decline to terminal area salmon fisheries has occurred over the decades, as many of you know. This decline is attributed to many factors, but a decline in hatchery production has been one of the main reasons for declining fisheries, not to mention habitat. For our purposes of establishing objectives, we have used harvest levels from the mid-1980s as the model for newly developed hatchery production objectives. So this is a fisheries co-manager plan, which the co-managers jointly developed and agreed to as the interim plan to increase hatchery production in the terminal area. The production from our hatcheries will benefit terminal area tribal and non-tribal fisheries, as well as pre-terminal fisheries. This plan is structured to specifically benefit the terminal area harvest and fisheries, while also accounting for the complexities of the Endangered Species Act, ongoing salmon recovery efforts, as well as hatchery facility characteristics and limitations. It relies on the requirement for close co-manager coordination and support of each other's programs. In addition, with the general understanding that Nooksack early Chinook and Samish fall Chinook are high priority stocks for southern resident killer whales, we do also expect additional benefits for killer whales through the process of increasing the availability of temporally diverse prey. For some clarification on what it means when we refer to the terminal area, it includes management areas 7B, 7C, 7D, the Nooksack River sub-areas, and the Samish area. So we're not talking about area 7A up there in the Southern Strait, or area 7. The Endangered Species Act limits, as the unfortunate byproduct of degraded habitat capacity and function, what we can ultimately produce from hatcheries. However, acknowledging why we are increasing production to achieve harvest objectives is really the key to understanding the basis of the 10-year plan. Current habitat function and capacity cannot support enough naturally produced or wild fish to sustain harvest at a meaningful level. Habitat conditions in the Nooksack are severely degraded, and the effects of degraded habitat affect and limit abundance and productivity at every stage in salmon life history while they are dependent on the Nooksack watershed. So until habitat and ecosystem functions are restored, regional hatcheries are required to continue mitigating for the lost natural productivity and abundance of our salmon populations. We are really faced with having to balance the complexities of a rapidly growing human population and the development that further ensues from that, while also ensuring the future of treaty, non-tribal, and recreational fishing. The objectives of the 10-year plan include increased production from regional hatcheries to improve terminal area tribal and non-tribal harvest opportunity. With modifications to certain programs, our objectives can be expanded to also increase the spatial and temporal harvest opportunity, something that we refer to as spreading the fleet here at Lummi. This includes increasing the temporal distribution of returning adults from specific stocks, as well as providing new or enhanced harvest opportunity in certain areas that may have never existed or existed at fairly limited levels. Implementing the plan and structuring programs will be done within the current confines of the Endangered Species Act. And finally, an important objective is that the plan will complement and bolster the need for habitat restoration and protection. After all, hatchery-produced salmon also require abundant and functional habitat. Many of you may already be familiar with the regional facilities in our area. The key facilities include Kendall Creek Hatchery, Skookum Creek Hatchery, Lummi Bay Hatchery, Whatcom Creek Hatchery, and Samish Hatchery. In some cases, production increases are not significant or there is no change in terms of individual programs. In other cases, production increases are quite significant compared to recent averages. Some programs will inevitably require years to build, and others have already achieved their goals. However, monitoring and evaluating programs and researching strategies to maximize survival of fish released from all of these regional programs will be a critical ongoing effort. It's important to keep in mind that the 10-year plan cannot be gauged simply by numbers of fish released. That's a common trap that people get caught into in discussions of hatcheries. It must be gauged by the number of fish harvested and how many fish each individual program achieves as far as contributing towards harvest. The harvest figure here is not comprehensive for all fisher groups and fisheries. For the purposes of explaining goals, this is what we presented to Lummi Fishers and Lummi Policy to get support for the plan in its early stages. However, modeling the harvest objectives upon the mid-1980s harvest, regardless of who may have caught those fish, is our shared objective amongst the co-managers. It goes without saying the cultural significance of salmon to Lummi and Nooksack tribal members and their ability to engage in fishing is paramount. For tribal fishers, there's also a critical economic importance. Many tribal families receive a majority of their annual income from fishing. The terminal area also supports one of the last few remaining non-tribal commercial gillnet fisheries. And further, the economic value of recreational fisheries in Washington alone was recently estimated at $1.03 billion. And this estimate comes from Trushansky 2018, if anybody is wondering. The key here is that harvest opportunity equals advocacy and continued investment in our shared fishery resources, which include habitat restoration, land acquisition, and meaningful environmental protection policy. Let's not lose sight of the fact that the reason so much money has been put towards salmon recovery is because nearly everyone likes to eat salmon. We hope that the new spring Chinook fishery opportunity that we saw in 2020 for all of the, or most of the user groups is an indication for what the future holds in the Nooksack Basin. This spring, Lummi was able to conduct the largest directed subsistence fishery on early Chinook in recent history in terms of the number of tribal members who could participate. And Nooksack tribe also had a enhanced CNS fishery. And Ned, if there's anything additional you want to emphasize on that, feel free to.
No, I think it went well this year, and I will just say that this fishery is the highest priority fisher of our fishers. I think I can say that pretty confidently. Gary used to say it, the fishers love this fishery. It means a great deal to them.
Great. Thank you, Ned. And this year as well, the first recreational fishery for Nooksack spring Chinook occurred, and that was the first one since 1954. I don't know if Ed Eliezer, if you have any additional points you want to make on that one.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I would. I just want to add, that was the first fishery in over 60 years that we had in that stretch. That is how long the tribes and our fishermen have not fished in that reach for spring Chinook. That's a long time, 60 years. And without the collaboration of Nooksack and Lummi Nation, we would have never turned the tide on bringing these stocks back. When we started our conservation program more than a decade ago, we had trouble finding adults just to start the program. And we had to go with a few hundred juveniles to help these stocks recover to the abundant levels that we're fishing on today, something I'm very proud of. And thank you, Alan Chapman, for all your past work on that as well. And while we give time for the habitat to heal, programs like these, the South Fork Spring Chinook, will be necessary to provide important food source, not only for southern resident killer whale, but as well as fulfilling our collective harvest goals. So thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. So to wrap this aspect up, the co-managers have an emphasis on working together to achieve a shared common goal. That is one of the most important ingredients for making any of these plans come to fruition. Regional hatchery facilities require significant capital improvements to responsibly accommodate increased production, and several of these improvement projects are currently underway at both Lummi and WDFW facilities. Lummi and WDFW, as the hatchery operators, have had pretty good success building the financial support for facility improvements and modernization. And despite the progress, we still need to secure millions of additional dollars necessary for facility improvements in order to fully achieve our production objectives. Hatchery and genetic management plans, or HGMPs, serve as the resource management plan required for ESA coverage for each and every hatchery program. Each program has an HGMP, and we actually have the largest bundle in Washington State with 12 HGMPs right here in the Nooksack-Samish terminal area. Excuse me. HGMPs need to include very specific information about hatchery programs, such as program objectives. The programs need clear and specific objectives. That's the important aspect. As far as hatchery operations go, they have to describe broodstock collection, spawning, incubation, rearing, release, fish health monitoring, and many other aspects. As far as the monitoring and evaluation descriptions go, it's good to point out that the Nooksack Basin co-managers have a long history of being ahead of the curve of monitoring both hatchery and natural origin fish, and our monitoring and evaluation plans contained in the HGMPs are no exception to this, and we are ensuring an enhanced ability to effectively monitor and evaluate our programs. We can't simply raise as many fish as we desire in any hatchery, though that era is over. NOAA restricts what we can produce. And hatchery programs are not in their own little separate individual silos. Everything is connected and integrated. And we like to refer to the 4-H's concept as a reminder of this. I want to preface the 10-year plan's alignment with regional salmon recovery with this excerpt from the final concluding paragraph from a fisheries technical report, where it states, most importantly, harvesting of Nooksack spring Chinook must be prevented until the stock has recovered. One cannot expect recovery for several years. The way it's written, it sounds like it was written fairly recently, right? Wrong. This was written 40 years ago. The point to this excerpt is that we have been stuck in an endless recovery dilemma that has come at the cost of harvest opportunity. 40 years have gone by and we're still saying the same thing in many cases. No commercial fishing, tribal or non-tribal, has occurred since the 1970s in the terminal area on the early Chinook. And what tribal CNS fishing that has occurred is highly regulated with few allowable wild fish encounters, and no recreational fishery had existed, as we mentioned, on spring Chinook going all the way back to 1957. So for those who believe that stopping fishing will result in recovery, this is a good example for why that is a flawed approach. Recovery through restricted harvest is a myth. Habitat function and habitat quantity dictate the viability of salmon populations, not fishing. Having said all of that, achieving the 10-year plan's production objectives will not deviate from any aspect to the recovery plan's framework for hatcheries. In fact, as we've mentioned before, the plan will complement Nooksack salmon recovery and this support for greater habitat restoration and protection. Our ongoing transgenerational genetic mark recapture through the basin shows strong evidence of generally significant annual contribution to natural production by hatchery spawners. And these are the hatchery origin Chinook adults that are staying in the river and spawning naturally. We had an all-time record high statistical confidence from brood year 2018 GMR analysis, which coincidentally showed that the majority of natural origin juvenile outmigrants were produced by hatchery origin spawners. Importantly, GMR analysis supports the plethora of all other evidence that habitat function and quantity in the Nooksack Basin are highly limiting for both natural and hatchery spawners, both. In conclusion, the 10-year plan is ambitious, but we made pretty good progress in the less than 2 years since the plan was developed. However, we still have a significant amount of progress to make with building programs and modernizing hatcheries and building up our operational and monitoring capacity in the basin. Hatcheries will continue to provide increasing harvest opportunity until habitat function and capacity is restored. Chinook recovery programs will continue to supplement natural populations and prevent extinction of native stocks while simultaneously providing harvest opportunity and purpose to recovery actions. Finally, it's critically important to keep in mind that the limitations of current habitat capacity and function limit fishery access for all fishers to surplus hatchery origin adults. So I recognize that I failed to include any opportunity for questions directly in the presentation. So before I go to the final slide, which is the policy discussion, I'd be willing to take any questions that about our plan and this talk, if you have any.
Gary, do you want to start with, see if there's management team questions, and then there's a couple that are in the chat box.
Sure. Does the management team have any members have any questions for Tom? Okay, hearing none. Tom, can you see the questions in the chat box, starting with Atul and then Alan? Or do you want me to read those to you?
I see, all I'm seeing is Alan's question.
Okay, well, you can start with that one, and there's one right above that that I can read to you after that.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I'll start with Alan's question. So Alan's obviously been paying attention to what's going on with the WDFW Commission's proposed hatchery policy. We don't expect that that the policy is going to affect any aspect of our plan, even if the language might directly conflict with some of what we're trying to achieve. It would make sense for Lummi policy and WDFW to probably also try to provide a little bit of input on this, but it is something that we're working on trying to address right now, and there's still a lot that has to get figured out with that proposed policy.
Does anybody on the line from DFW have anything to add to that? So Brendan or
I'll add to that. This is Edward. That's a really good question, Alan. And what I would say to that is when we design the 10-year plan, we work very closely with NOAA and the top scientists in the region to develop a plan that would not only conserve our natural stocks, but also put hatchery fish that wouldn't impede recovery. And so thinking about the commission hatchery policy, I don't see any design flaw that would kind of interact with the policy that would say we can't go forward with it. That they're very similar in nature. And so I'm not seeing this as a roadblock, not to say something will come up, but if something does come up, we'll work together as co-managers to kind of plow through it. So thanks for your question.
Okay, thank you. And so Tom, it looks like the other question is from Atul Deshmani. Do fisheries enhance habitat?
They do, in the sense that was pointed out in the presentation, that fisheries increase and maintain advocacy in protecting and enhancing a resource. So without fisheries present, what advocacy or impetus for habitat protection and restoration exists? If you look at recovery of animals that people don't like to eat, I like to point out the case of the black-footed ferret recovery. The amount of money that has been put towards black-footed ferret recovery is like it's the teensiest, tiniest drop in the bucket compared to salmon. That people don't like to eat ferrets, and there's no real justification to. I mean, not that I'm supporting this notion, but from a policy perspective or a public desire perspective, what difference does it make if black-footed ferrets are recovered and restored to historic abundance? That's really the difference here, and that's how fisheries have a direct role in providing that the need and drive for meaningful environmental protection policy.
So
I would add to that by saying not all things are science-based. Some are treaty-based. We made a bargain. The United States got everything it asked for in that bargain. We're waiting for what we bargained for. And it's a legal issue and a policy issue. And yeah, there's implications to habitat that we didn't create, that we're dealing with and trying to make the best out of it, while trying to maintain a semblance of what we bargained for, and work towards recovery of habitat. And while that's going to take over 100 years in the Nooksack, we need fish to meet a portion of the obligation the United States has to our treaties. Well, hopefully that helps.
yes, thanks, GI. So Tom, there's a couple of questions coming in. Did you have more
Yeah.
to discuss?
There is the final slide. And I know we're already starting to touch on some of the aspects. I think I'll turn to that.
Okay.
And I will also address Alan's second question, where he asked if the HGMPs supporting the plan have been approved by NOAA Fisheries. The answer to that is no. We have completely and entirely overhauled all the HGMPs that we submitted in 2015, and we are nearing the completion of the final two new HGMPs, and we expect to be submitting those to NOAA in the very near future, and consultation will begin. They have, however, already been briefed on what our plan is and have already provided some response to the plans and the structure, and there appears to be pretty favorable acknowledgement for what our plan is.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
As far as the WDF and W hatchery policy, as far as I know, that's not a done deal. And
Correct.
we're gonna allow tribal input. And so that's not a
Yep.
done deal on the hatchery policy from WDF and W. And also we're pushing region by region, because they can't do a cookie cutter hatchery policy for all watersheds.
Yep. Renee asks, how does the proposed hatchery at the mouth of Whatcom Creek in the waterfront redevelopment area fit into this plan? If you're referring to the proposed private nonprofit or Alaska Models hatchery, it doesn't fit into it. That wouldn't be a co-manager facility, and that is its own separate issue on its own. And it looks like I've gotten all of the questions addressed. So that queues up the policy discussion, and policy.
This is Renee. I just one follow-up question. You're saying that the proposed hatchery doesn't fit because it's a private nonprofit model based off the Alaska hatchery. And I'm wondering, does this plan, as is presented, support or preclude the proposal?
Neither, but
Neither. Okay.
that's a policy question, and I would rely on Lummi policy to be able to answer that in a more tactful way than me.
This is GI, and we were involved in the first thinking of what they were trying to do there, and what they were trying to propose is just really complicated, and the situation that they're pointing to, this works in Alaska, is a whole lot different than what we have here, both environmentally and legally. And on top of where we're maxed out on what we can do right now, and it doesn't fit in with our current level of plans, nor do we have time to deal with all of the ESA issues and harvest sharing issues and water issues that this complicates. And without going into too much detail, that's kind of where we're at. We have sent them a letter saying we cannot support this proposal at this time. And that's kind of where it sits.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
This is Brendan. Can I jump in there and address some of that too? Is this a good time?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Tom. That's a great presentation. Really appreciate it, and thank you, Lummi and Nooksack, our co-managers, for helping to make that spring fishery even a possibility. Just kind of adding on to what Edward said, first spring fishery in 60 years for our stakeholders. So very much appreciate that. And then as far as the Alaska model hatchery, we're not doing anything without our co-manager's approval there. So we are kind of sitting back and waiting to see how that works out. It looks like they will be proposing something to the legislature to try and get some funding and support for that. As far as we're concerned, if it's not going to work for our co-managers, it's not going to work for us. So we're completely in support of that. They don't have, in Alaska, they don't have the same issues. There is no, bolt decision. There is no ESA concern up there. So like we have down here. So it's an Alaska model, not a Washington model. And so we've been sitting by and engaging with them. But like I said, we're going to be supporting our co-manager's decision. And right now, there's just not room for that. So we'll see what happens in the next legislative session. Not really sure where that's going to go. But we're in support of our co-managers. Just so folks know where we stand on that one.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, Tom, were you planning to go through these policy items? Or somebody else?
I'll start. This is GI. And this kind of follows up with the pieces that I was talking about earlier. My impression of where we are with the RIA process is, and Puget Sound Partnership for that, as far as that goes, is that this is the co-manager's plan. And as we've gone through this, we've shown, look, no, this is the benefits of this go equally to the citizens of the state, of the county, of the cities within the county. And this needs to be a regional plan that we are all adopting, not just for hatcheries, but for habitat and for salmon recovery as well. These can't be separate pieces, and we can't be acting in contrary to an adopted plan. And that's kind of where I was going with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, is that those have to be aimed at a collective goal, not collective projects, not just priority or near-term agenda projects, but this has to be aimed at an outcome and a goal that we're all supportive of, and doing everything we can to achieve that goal. Now, the counties and the cities and the state may have growth management that they need to deal with, but it can't be contrary and deductive of what we're trying to do with salmon recovery. We have our growth issues here at Lummi as well, and we've got to deal with those. And they can't be contrary to what our natural resource needs are. And we just want to be figuring out how do we get to a comprehensive plan on habitat, on salmon recovery, and on hatcheries on the interim basis, while we get to actual recovery some 2 or 3 generations from now. But in the interim, the state citizens would like to have some fish, and everything we do here is based on fish. We need fish. Our treaty right is based in fish and wildlife and gathering. And as the state adds population, adds the encumbrance on the counties and the cities to absorb that growth, it impacts everything we reserved in our treaties. And this can't be, we've been compromised to the point where there's nothing left. Our economy is based on fish. And so when economy is talked about, it has to include our ability to sustain ourselves with what we reserved in our treaty rights. And that, for better or worse, for the large part, depends on what the counties and the cities do, and how they are going to support a very specific goal that needs to be there, and a very specific plan that needs to be there, just as we've done for hatcheries that produce outcome and produce actual fish back to our people. That's what we're expecting of habitat, and so that there's actual ability to say, yes, scientifically, this is what needs to be here. There needs to be a plan, not based on projects, but projects that are intended to achieve a planned outcome. And this isn't Merle's words or the department's word, but mine, that there needs to be a geographic scope of what we're talking about here, not just amorphous policy of site potential tree height, we need to get to water quality issues that deal with temperature, not on a project basis, but on a plan basis where the project's actually achieving an outcome. And that's kind of what I was bringing up earlier with this private company, that it's when it takes on a project, it's based in an outcome, and that's what we've got to do here, is establish what those are and be real clear about it so that they can be measured and attained and adapted to if it's not being achieved. And right now, the measurements and the ability to do things is based on how much money we've spent and who gets it, and not based on real outcomes. They're right now based in projects, and so we've got to get pulling all of these pieces together, and that it's a total regional plan that we're all in support of and working towards, recognizing that there's conflicts in adopting something like that, and those will always be there. But if we always limit what we can do by the amount of conflicts we can develop, I think by these processes that we're all involved in, we can see that we can come up with more conflicts than we can solutions. So it's imperative that we get to setting some real expectations of ourselves, and that we are have a specific set of plans that we believe will achieve that. And that's kind of where we're coming from, where we've been working towards. Yeah, this was initially a Lummi plan, but we worked with Nooksack and our relatives there to get them on board with the hatchery plan. We worked with the state to get them on board with the hatchery plan. And, we hope that this is something that the RIA or the management process, the management board can get on board with. Yeah, this is your hatchery plan as well, because your citizens benefit from it as much as we do. And with an interim step of how do we fund this? We've gotten pretty good support from the state of Washington this year, from the Pacific Salmon Treaty, and moving and inching along to support this, but it's not easy, given that the majority of funding, if not all of the funding, is habitat oriented, while we still need fish, both the state citizens and our tribal citizens. So I've had my spiel. Merle or others from tribal policy?
Yeah, I'm here, GI. So
okay.
Okay, I want to thank everybody here. Again, I do want to thank Al Chapman again too. He done a lot of work on this plan here, and also I want to thank Bill Finkbonner. Both these guys here worked a whole lot on this salmon recovery here at Skookum here, and I just want to thank them. They're both retired. There was a lot of work here, and but also every year, when we fish in the river, we use this salmon here also for the first salmon ceremony. We invited a lot of people to the salmon ceremony, and this is the first year that we missed the first salmon ceremony because of the COVID. And hopefully that's going to be gone next year so we can have the first salmon ceremony back in place again. Anyway, I want to thank Tom for doing a good job here. And I guess what